Shortly after releasing two of arguably the best fighting games on the PS2, Virtua Fighter 4 and Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution in 2002 and 2003 respectively, Sega took the next 2 years off from major fighting game releases to secretly work hard on their next project in the Virtua Fighter franchise. After the first game had set the arcade on fire with its at the time realistic depiction of three-dimensional polygonal character models fighting in a fully rendered environment, Sega kept upping the ante with every following game. The graphics improved, more characters, moves, and combos were added, and a brand new mode called Quest Mode was introduced, providing players with the ability to virtually travel to different Sega arcades and play a constant stream of opponents to become the champion, and both critics and die-hard fighting game fans loved it. After Virtua Fighter had completed its run on the PS2 and Dreamcast, where could the series go from here? What new features, modes, and characters could be added? Sega had the answers to those questions and much more. After all, this is the first high-definition Sega fighting game. This is the first game in the series to be released on the Xbox. This is the first game in the series to incorporate online play, and this is the first game in the series to be kept alive for over a decade via continuous updates. The 26th of February 2005 was the day the Japanese fighting game fans and the gaming press were eagerly looking forward to, the very first public playable instance of Virtua Fighter 5. Hosted at Sega Club West Shinjuku, or Gigo Shinjuku Nishiguchi, Sega installed Virtua Fighter 5 arcade cabinets for members of the public to play. It's been reported that lines of up to 30 people at a time were constantly crowded around the machines, impatiently waiting to purchase a 500 yen player card that granted them access to the machine. There were 4 playable cabinets and a special cabinet called VF.TV that acted as a way for players to watch current matches, see advertisements for the game, and to witness interviews of pro players in the Japanese Virtua Fighter scene. Sega handed out surveys to attendees to gather feedback that could be incorporated into the final release of the game, which we'll get to later. All the characters from Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution were playable, along with Al Blaze, one of 2 new characters present in Virtua Fighter 5. The game itself in these screenshots looks similar to the final version, although the character select screen looks more like the one found in Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution rather than in the final version of Virtua Fighter 5. For now, this was the only chance for members of the public to play the game. Until April 2006. The 15th of April 2006 was the next time Virtua Fighter 5 would be available to be played by the general public before release. Hosted at 3 different Club Sega locations, Sega brought a more recent build of the game, and luckily for us, footage of this version still exists. Unlike the last location test, where Al Blaze was the only new character who was playable, this version contained Eileen, the other new character. Pre-existing characters received several new features, such as Lion with his new stance and jumping attacks. A new feature called the Terminal was added. For 100 yen, players received 5 minutes to use a touchscreen for the purpose of character customization. You could edit your character's appearance, but also edit your profile username, pre-battle quote, and multiple different costumes. After this location test was over, Virtua Fighter 5 was ready to be completed, being just about done in the very final stages of development. Shortly after, the game would be released in the arcades. Only in Japan. July 12, 2006 was the highly anticipated release day for Virtua Fighter 5 in arcades all over Japan. While the game hadn't come overseas yet, Japanese gamers ate it up while it was still exclusive to the land of the rising sun. Running on the Sega Lindbergh arcade hardware, the game blew players away with its impressive graphical fidelity and attention to detail. Message boards from 2005 and 2006 about the game are still up to date, and they contain people's thoughts on the graphics and presentation. The game came complete with 18 characters and various gameplay additions. A new addition was the clash mechanic. If a throw connected with a strike on the same frame, both characters would have their attacks invalidated and placed at 0 frame advantage, resetting the tide of battle back to neutral. Offensive moves, where you push all 3 attack buttons during a sidestep, were also a new feature not present in Virtua Fighter 4, and these allowed for attacks that initiated back or side staggers for guaranteed big damage combos. While being the sole version of Virtua Fighter 5 at the time, things were about to change, as Virtua Fighter 5 was about to receive its first update. December 14th, 2006 was the launch of Virtua Fighter 5 version B, which was a balance update to the game. Later, on February 20th, 2007 in North America, and February 23rd, 2007 in Europe, version B was finally released on home consoles outside of Japan, providing Western gamers a way to experience the game at home. This home console version came jam-packed with new modes and features, and was even a launch title for the PS3 in Europe as the system hadn't been released there yet. While the game released to positive reviews and strong sales in Japan, the game's biggest flaw was a lack of online play, but what it did have was arcade mode, versus mode which lets you play against another person offline, dojo which lets you practice either freely or to pull off every single move with a character of your choosing, VFTV which lets you watch replays and set up AI fights to watch the gameplay itself, Customize which lets you change the appearance of your character, and finally, Quest mode. The game doesn't have a huge amount of content, but the simple yet strategic fighting system makes up for it as it challenges you to get lost in its nuances and learn the mechanics in and out. On January 16th of 2008, Sega confirmed that the PS3 version of Virtua Fighter 5's lack of online play was a necessity, as due to how the version B arcade release was designed and programmed, adding online functionality would simply have been impossible. If you wanted to play this game online, you had to wait for Virtua Fighter 5 version C. July 24th, 2007 was the day that Virtua Fighter 5 version C was released into Japanese arcades, with a console release occurring on October 26th in Europe and on October 30th in North America. This update was substantial, as it finally brought the game to Xbox with the newly introduced feature to the series, online play. Dubbed Virtua Fighter 5 Online on the home console version, Version C was based on a more recent update to the game, introducing new balance changes not present in the PS3 version. PS3 owners were left in the dark on this one, as they were stuck with an outdated version of the game with no online play, so the only choice for die-hard Virtua Fighter fans was to purchase an Xbox 360 to play online via Xbox Live with the game's delay-based netcode. Other than the balance changes and addition of online play, this game is the exact same as the PS3 version, so there aren't a lot of major differences between the previous revision of the game and this one. As this is the second version of Virtua Fighter 5 in just over a year, you might think that Sega would be slowing down with the re-releases of the game, but you'd be wrong. They were only just beginning. On July 24th, 2008, exactly 1 year after version C had released in Japanese arcades, Japan got yet another version of the game, titled Virtua Fighter 5 R. However, this new revision was announced at the AOU Amusement Expo on February 14th, an expo dedicated to arcade operators showing off their new products to the public and investors. Virtua Fighter 5 R introduced two new characters, Jean Kujo, a brand new character who practices karate, and Taka Arashi, the sumo wrestler from Virtua Fighter 3. This revision increased the fighter count to 20 and introduced some major changes, such as new stages, a new soundtrack, and major gameplay/balance changes. Virtua Fighter 5R version B was released in Japanese arcades on May 21st, 2009 with animation changes and an improved camera, and Virtua Fighter 5R version C was also released in Japanese arcades on November 25th, 2009, but this version had no balance changes, containing only new items for the character outfits. Other than the very first release of the game back in 2006, this was the only version of the game to remain a Japanese exclusive. It has never been officially playable outside of Japan to this day. But don't worry, because Sega had plans for even more international Virtua Fighter 5 goodness. July 29th, 2010 was the Japanese arcade release of the next version of Virtua Fighter 5, dubbed Final Showdown. If the name is anything to go by, then this would indeed be the end of Virtua Fighter 5 before a potential Virtua Fighter 6 would be released on the next generation of consoles. Featuring new animations, costumes, stages, and balance changes, Final Showdown would be a Japan exclusive for both its original arcade release in 2010 and with Final Showdown version A, which launched on April 20th, 2011. While this seemed like the end of Western gamers getting their hands on Virtua Fighter 5 after the previous 4 years of Japanese exclusivity for the series, it was announced at Gamescom 2011 that Final Showdown would indeed be coming to Western consoles in 2012 on June 5th for PS3 and June 6th for the Xbox 360 with online play for both systems. That's right, PS3 owners finally got online play a mere 5 years after the launch of version B on PS3. Unlike the previous versions of the game, Final Showdown was not released as a physical game, instead being digitally distributed through both the PlayStation Store and the Xbox Live Marketplace for only $15. The catch was that due to memory limitations, Quest Mode and most additional outfits were removed from the game, with the previous version's cosmetics being sold as paid DLC. None of the older stages were playable in Final Showdown, with only this version's new stages being selectable. While Final Showdown was never officially released on next-generation systems like the PS4, other Sega games such as Yakuza 6, Judgment, and Yakuza Like a Dragon all contained Final Showdown in their in-game arcades. Although Final Showdown was made backwards compatible on the Xbox One on September 15th, 2016. Final Showdown lived up to its namesake as Sega didn't update or support the game any longer. The constant stream of updates in the past was merely a fleeting memory as Virtua Fighter fans had to put up with a version of the game that lacked content present in the more obtuse older versions of the game from the days of old. However, in 2020, the fate of the series would change. At the Tokyo Game Show 2020, Sega announced a brand new project to the world, Virtua Fighter Cross Esports Project. No one knew with 100% certainty what the game would be upon release, but the confirmed return of the series was amazing to witness, especially after the Final Showdown hiatus. Properly announced in more detail on May 25th, 2021, the game was officially titled Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown, releasing exclusively on the PS4 via digital download, containing new content such as... well, it didn't. The game has received new costumes in the form of Tekken 7 and Yakuza crossover DLCs, but the actual game is still the exact same as Final Showdown. It has the same netcode, the same character roster, and the same balance and gameplay. Some new characters would have been nice, but hey, at least it's now easier than ever to play Virtua Fighter 5 on the PS4, no more having to load into Yakuza or Judgment to experience the game. What's most interesting about Ultimate Showdown is that it runs on a completely different engine to the previous games. While Virtua Fighter 5 Vanilla all the way to Final Showdown ran on the Sega Lindbergh hardware, both Sega AM2, the original developers, and Ryu Ga Gotoku Studio, developers of Yakuza, have perfectly recreated Virtua Fighter 5 in their Dragon engine, Sega's new engine that powers the most recent Yakuza titles. Unlike Final Showdown, this version is thankfully being kept alive with DLC, the most recent of which is the Tekken 7 crossover costume DLC, which launched on June 1st, 2022. Like other fighting games with multiple revisions, Virtua Fighter 5 has gone through many significant changes over time, from the days of Japanese gamers flocking to pre-release builds in Japanese arcades in the early 2000s, to gamers across the world playing Virtua Fighter on more modern consoles amid a global pandemic. A lot has changed in both the real world and the game world. The next question that's on everyone's mind is, where's Virtua Fighter 6? Unfortunately, we don't have the answers to that. Sega has a track record of abandoning classic IPs, so maybe Virtua Fighter 6 will come out years and years in the future, if it ever comes out at all. Sega had answers to the questions at the start of the video, and I believe they have answers to the questions regarding Virtua Fighter 6, but the time isn't right for them to speak on it just yet. While the series may not be as popular as other 3D fighting games like Tekken, I believe Virtua Fighter possesses an intricate level of mastery, dexterity, and maturity over that series, and most other fighting games. It's a shame that the series' most recent entry is still niche and hasn't reached its full potential, but I implore you to give this game a shot if you get the chance to. This is one of the deepest yet most accessible fighting games of all time. This is one of the most visually stunning martial arts simulators ever made, and this is also one of the most painfully overlooked games in the modern era of fighting games. This is Virtua Fighter 5.